Hi, I am Jeffrey Wernick, and welcome to another Fein Points. And Bruce, Ryan, happy to see you this Monday morning, afternoon, depending upon which time zone you're in. Hope you all had a great weekend. I'm going to start off with a short, little brief talk, and then have both of you to respond to it. Okay, I'm going to start off with something that might not seem important to people listening, but I will soon make a point about it. Trump, right now, there has been some land in D.C. that they're talking about building a new stadium for the Washington Commanders, but it requires many government approvals, including for the Trump administration to approve. And Trump has said that he will not give his approval if the team is not named according to the name he wants it to be named. So he's going to deprive the whole city of a new stadium, the new team of a new stadium, unless they use the name he wants them to name it. Okay, so he wants to go back to the Washington Redskins. He wants them to abandon the Washington Commanders, and is willing to hold the transaction up until they give in and do exactly what he wants. Okay. So we also have the example of, again, that we've talked about before, the merger between U.S. Steel and the Japanese steel company that gave Trump this golden share. So he basically has absolute governance control over the company. So if they want to do anything, any decision that's out of the ordinary, outside of the daily course of business, that ultimately he has veto power on every decision, that they make, that gives him, a tremendous amount of control, given the fact that which is even worse because they have no economic interest. So he can hold the whole company and the shareholders hostage to whatever his whims are. So now we have, and we also have the other examples of him going after every law firm that hired anyone that ever filed a lawsuit against something he had an interest in, and basically wanting to make sure that, basically looking to bankrupt them, so that put conditions on them so that nobody would want to hire them. You have him attempting to bankrupt Columbia University and Harvard University until they bend to his will. And so you have all these examples of this authoritarian behavior, and I think there should be no doubt that he is really running an extortion racket out of the White House. Referring to, if we think about the lawsuits that were settled, you have the lawsuits that were settled, like, that I think ABC settled because of Stephanopoulos' comments, where he referred to Trump as a rapist, when actually, as I recall, the judge in the ruling against the case with respect to Carol, the judge said, well, Trump, in the narrow definition of rape, according to New York statute, Trump did not rape her, but in the common usage of the word, he did rape her. So the judge did say that, and basically, that's what Stephanopoulos, when he used the term rape, he was referring to the words the judge himself had used to describe the act. So it's not likely that if it ever really would have gotten to court, that ABC would have ever lost that lawsuit, because of the fact that you have right from the judge's own mouth. There's a reference to judge saying, from a broader definition, from a common usage of the word, that Trump did in fact rape Carol. I think that's more or less, as I recall, the words that the judge used. So what you should see from the example of Trump withholding his authority, and what I think any reasonable person would say an abuse of his authority, it's reasonable that these people would pay him off, because this is a very petty person who's a vindictive person who never forgets any grudge, and they have corporate interests. And when he's suing them, they say, better pay it off. Then basically every time we go and we need permission from something, we'll have the same thing happen to us that's happening to the Washington Commanders, is the fact that they won't get their stadium just because they won't do things on his terms. Okay. CBS also, who knows with respect to, I'm not going to say that they dumped, Colbert because of his comments, calling the $16 million payment that CBS made, I guess, to smooth the path for their merger with Skydance, that he called it a bribe. It might in fact be a bribe. It might be in fact is a money that they had to pay, that if they didn't pay it, they'd be in the situation that the Washington Commanders are in, that they would never get a deal approved because he would hold it up for very personal reasons, because he's holding up he threatened to hold up the Washington Commander for very personal reasons. So given that pattern of behavior, if he targets you, you know what the consequences are if he targets you. Either you'll have to spend a lot of money on legal fees defending yourself against all branches of government, or hopefully you can come up with a dollar amount that you find reasonable, that he finds reasonable, that makes him, less upset with you. But who knows whether he'll come back and extort you again, because you'll leave yourself open to, if you allow yourself to be extorted once, then you open yourself to future requests for extortion. He'll keep wanting more. So I'm going to reinforce that now with another thing I read out of the Washington Post that I shared with Bruce and Ryan this morning. How many times has Trump been alleged to have defied the courts? Not complying with court orders, 38 cases. Giving false or misleading information, 9 times. Withholding evidence, 5 times. Creating pretext to go around the court order, 5 times. So I think the number they came up with, in one of 3 judges who have ruled against him, he's basically defied the court orders. So it should be evident that we have a president that really doesn't. And again, this is the president who said his understanding is he doesn't believe he really has to comply or uphold with what the Constitution says. So when asked about it, he's already made that that reference. So you have a pattern of behavior of somebody who is basically a lawless rogue occupying the White House. So and I've laid out, I think, and I've laid out just a partial case. I could go on for a much longer time giving other examples, but I'm gonna stop here and now. Bruce, I'll turn it over first to you to get your feedback on my opening statement.
Well, I think it's fair to characterize Trump as following a socialist communist model, where he tries to turn the entire economy into his personal engagement, aggrandizement, if you will, and uses non-economic reasons to advance his agenda. And what he certainly did that with regard to the merger between Nippon and U.S. Steel. I think he's doing that with regard to holding up, not enforcing the congressional ban against TikTok. He's trying to use the government to advance a business endeavor. And surely you omitted, I'm sure it's a matter of time, Jeffrey and Ryan, what about the foreigners? The Qatar 747. He's basically said, you nominate me for a Nobel Peace Prize, you give me money, you patronize my businesses, and I'll do favors for you. Which is, again, that's what communists do. And he even translates it into, other political endeavors abroad, telling Brazil, unless you do a favor for my friend Bolsonaro, I'm going to slap 50% tariffs on you. And then he goes and tells the Israelis, well, listen, if you want a good deal with us, you got to get rid of this so-called witch hunt against Netanyahu, which, again, is the president is interfering with the Israeli internal affairs, not based upon anything but, a political ambition. And with regard to his own words, and this is July 23rd, 2019, Jeffrey and Ryan, this is the exact.
Ooh, lost him. He is on his cell phone, I believe, so it might be a little bit spotty. But I'll go ahead and jump in then. In lieu, in time, unless he comes back, I'll jump back and let him continue, if that's okay, Jeffrey.
Yeah, go ahead.
My thought on this
blend
was
of communism, socialism, and authoritarianism here, but it's clearly lawless, whatever else you mean. The reason why I'm inclined to get in the words socialism and communism, because he's using his government power to try to orchestrate the economy in a way that helps him politically or financially. It has nothing to do with free markets. And I can guarantee you that when the tariffs go into effect, and we don't know, he keeps backtracking, he's going to grant exemptions. People will go to him and say, if I do X, Y, Z, can you give me a waiver, an exemption? He will manipulate the tariffs to help his political friends and hurt his enemies. Have nothing to do with economics. And that's where we are. I mean, it's hard even to describe how lawless this nation has become. We have instances, and with the Washington Post article, where they were just kidnapping people off the street, sending them to foreign countries, not even telling, the courts at all what they're doing. Sometimes they were citizens. This ICE is governed by the Fourth Amendment like any other institution that prohibits unreasonable searches and seizures. They're just like the Gestapo in the Third Reich, claiming that they have no limits whatsoever. And they say also, Holman, if you're standing near someone who is an illegal alien, you can get caught up as well. That's your problem. You should be able to identify anyone here who's not authorized, and then you run away from them. That's the only way you can ensure you won't be kidnapped and detained as well. It's really the total destruction of the rule of law and everything we fought for in beginning July 4th, 1776.
I think Holman said reasonable cause was just the way somebody looked. So they can make a judgment based upon somebody's look, their tattoos, and just based upon that and in the proximity of the people that they're around, that they can just pick you up, and that for them is sufficient for them to pick you up and detain you into a shithole place, and detain you indefinitely into a shithole place, and maybe send you off to South Sudan, Libya, El Salvador, some other location, and not inform anybody of where you are, even though you've committed, the only crime you committed is you happen to be walking down a street, and there were few people that looked, Hispanic, Latino, whatever, and they picked them up because that for them, that's enough cause to pick somebody up. That's not profiling. That's and because you were near them, you must be aiding and abetting them because you're walking down the same street that they're walking down. So clearly you're aiding and abetting them, and you're as guilty as they are. Don't worry but if one day they ever let you call a lawyer, you might be able to then prove that you're a citizen. But then again, they might also just say you were resisting arrest, because of you were obstructing justice, because the police, the ICE agent does not like the way you looked at them. So, or when they ask you to put your hands behind your back, you didn't do it the way they exactly asked for it. So therefore you're obstructing because you didn't do it the precise way they wanted you to do it. So therefore you were resisting. I mean,
I think
what's happening in this country now.
It really goes against all of what we fought for, which is no guilt by association, right?
It's
Guilt
building
by
a culture of fear.
is basically is categorically unconstitutional. We have individual justice here. That was supposed to make us different from other countries. Now we're going back, really to prior July 4th, 1776. But Ryan, you chip in. You haven't had a chance.
Well, Ryan just said cultural fear. I just want to make one comment and then hand it over to Ryan after that. Culture of fear.
Yeah.
Not one is. I completely agree with you. It is all about instilling fear.
Yeah.
And I'll go to you, Bruce. Didn't somebody a long time ago say something about when the people fear the government, that's tyranny, and so why don't you go and say who said and what they said it?
That's Jefferson. Yeah, he said
exactly Jefferson.
Yeah, when the government fears the people, you got freedom. When the people fear the government, you got tyranny. That's exactly right, and that's what we're in the government now. With the monopoly of power, the monopoly of the money. It's exercising all of its authority to try to intimidate, make everyone docile. And I want to go back, and I'm repeating this over and over again because it's so important to me. That is independent of other bad things that come with big government. Too much regulation, it can be a handicap, if you will, on the economy. It's horrible because the bigger the government, the worse people get attracted to it, and the more damage they can do and crush your civil liberties, your freedom. That's a reason independent of just the inefficiency of big government. That's why the framers wanted to keep the federal government small, limited powers. They had law enforcement, but everyone else can march to their own drummer. And we've totally forgotten that. I mean, it's like we're living in an alien intellectual universe. The government grows bigger and bigger every year. In our entire lives, Ryan and Jeffrey, every year, the government has got bigger. The only question is how much bigger. It is never downsized. It's going in one direction, and it becomes more and more tyrannical, becomes more and more dangerous every time it grows.
Right. It's about building a culture of fear, as we all know throughout history, right? In a despotic regime, like it's that's how they rule, right? And so to Homan's situation, obviously it's about creating the idea that, like a see something, say something, tell on your neighbor, even if you don't know for sure. Like that's what they want to build in the community, which is just terrible. That causes unhappiness at the very least. But to a few points I want to make, and I want to bring up at some point in the conversation, and I'll just mention it now because you pointed to it, then I'll come back to the commanders. There's a new case of another, it's not the first time, as you both know, a U.S. citizen who's also a veteran who was grabbed up, same point, because he just was there. He's in a legal cannabis farm in California who's working as a guard. They grabbed everybody, didn't give him a chance to identify himself, and they put him on suicide watch where he wasn't allowed to call or do anything, and it was that wasn't the case. So we'll come back to that. I want to go through it because of what a perfect case it is, showing you how easy U.S. citizens could be caught up in this lawless reality. But to the point about your starting point, the commanders and the 1 and 3, it's interesting because first and foremost, anybody who's objectively looking at this, it's obvious. Donald Trump is acting from a rampantly lawless, petty, hubris-driven kind of mindset. That's who he is. Anybody honest can point that out. Now, but the point, though, of the commanders is interesting to me because I agree with the sentiment. When I first saw it, I thought the same thing. Here he is pushing his own opinion and stopping, what is happening because it's what he wants, because he's framing it as a woke point, right? Which, first of all, I disagree with. The idea that they forced the team to change the name because of the Reds, I think that's stupid, but people disagree. The point, though, is that is that what the people want? Is that what the team wants? And is he actually doing that because that's what they want? I don't believe that's what his mindset is. I think it's because it's what he wants to make it look like he's fighting woke ideology. But it does matter to me whether or not that might be what everyone wants as a counterbalance, as they were forced to change.
Let me tell you my comment on that, Ryan. My comment on that is that the MAGA party loves this because what is the MAGA party? What's their mantra? Okay, we're going to own the liberals. We're taking the country back. We are at war, okay? So for them, this is a war mentality, okay? And yes, they view the libs, the progressives, whomever they are, the socialists, the radical leftists, lunatics, whatever, adjectives they use to describe these people. The fact is they want to own them, okay? So, they like this authoritarianism use against them because, as I said, what does it say when you want to own someone? You want to take possession of them. This is not like we have ideological differences, okay? This is not a debate about ideological differences and different views of the country. They're taking America back. The liberals, the progressives, they took America away, and now they're taking it back, and it's a war. So they think that these methods are justified because they describe this as a war, and they want a general leading them in the war. They don't want a president, leading the country, constrained by the Constitution. They want a general, and they want to give the general wartime powers. And who are the enemies? The enemies are not the Russians. They're not the Chinese. They're not Qatar. They're not the Israelis. They're not Ukraine. The enemies are the libs, okay? The enemies are the American people who are non-MAGA. They're the enemies. They are the main enemy. And if you ask MAGA, I think of MAGA, you ask most MAGA people, I say, who's the biggest enemy of the United States? Probably their real answer is the libs. So they're going to war. They're taking back the country, and they have a general to do it. And you got to suspend the Constitution so the general can win back the country. And so they applaud this authoritarianism. Yeah. Like Bruce said, we can
hold on, guys, can I flesh out my point, though? I was in the middle of it. Just let me finish the thoughts I was going to give.
Right, and I don't want to get this point, and then you take over. But listen, it reminds me of Fidel Castro and the defense of the Cuban Revolution. Now they're asking the neighbors, look on other neighbors. They've even sicked people to look at the National Park Service to see what books are being sold. Are there any inscriptions that would cast a doubt that all Americans were created with angelic DNA and we never did anything bad? I mean, this is communism on steroids. We need to use this because it shows how completely lunatic these people are. They claim that they're the real conservatives. No, you're the communists. This is the thing that Karl Marx and Lenin and Cuba was using. Hey, the citizens go spy on everybody else. Tell them the mother and father. Right. Hey, there's a book on the Grand Canyon that doesn't lionize the United States. Hey, get rid of the book. The next step is book burning, for sure, like they did with the Roy Cohen visiting USIA libraries in the McCarthy area. That's how far we're gone.
Yeah. No, I agree completely. And just to continue the point is that, I'm saying that in the interest of that it does matter to me what the people may want, what maybe even the team may want. But nonetheless, what Trump is doing is ridiculous and wrong. I mean, it's not the coercion, the way he's abusing his power, regardless of the outcome or what they want. And I don't believe it's for that reason. I think it's because it's what he wants and how it will look. But I still think it's worth pointing that out. But I agree with you guys. And I think this is just a continuation of rampant lawlessness that our government left and right have been continuing for a long time. And to the point about the 1 and 3, it just adds to that. It is insane to me that you can look at 76% of the different lawsuits. And this is what the three of us have been harping on from the beginning, from when we started doing this, that it is blatant what they're doing, that it's not just left, it's not radical activism. There's clearly judges left and right on all sides who have been showing you that they're lying. If you read that article, skirting everything they can, trying to present false information, it just shows you that we're in a very, very dangerous path right now. And I'll leave it there for the moment, but I wanted to get into some of the other examples, but I'll throw it back to you guys.
Yeah, but I think, to my mind, the greatest danger is that, the Trump he's corrupted the idea of language.
Yeah.
That words don't mean anything to this guy anymore. We're Humpty Dumpty. A word means whatever I want it to mean. So we see this with regard to national emergencies. Anything is a national emergency. Now Venezuela is at war, is invading the United States. Everything is everybody is a terrorist who doesn't take the Trump view of supporting Netanyahu in Israel. Or you're an anti-Semite. So it's hard even to have conversations, these people, because they say, well, a word, it means whatever we think we want it to mean. So if we read the 14th Amendment and says, if you're born in the United States and have to obey U.S. laws, you're a citizen, it really doesn't mean that, because we can see hidden in the subtext what you can't see, like interpreting the Rosetta Stone. It really means that if you're born to parents that we don't like, you're not a citizen. I mean,
because Bruce, don't you know that they know for sure that that newborn child is born with the intention of overthrowing the country.
Right.
It does not want to subject itself to the jurisdiction of the United States. They know that is a fact.
There's a word to this, guys. It's Orwellian, right? I mean, they're literally recreating information, the words and everything, it's creating that mindset of the other, it's the same thing we see with Israel or anywhere else, any number of places where the person's born there, they're suddenly the bad guy, and this is how they build that sentiment over the process of a very long period of time.
Isn't the evidence among undocumented people that they are less likely to commit crimes than American born? So what we have the evidence is that undocumented are more inclined to subject themselves to the law than American citizens are.
Yes.
So that's what the data says.
Well, can I add one thing to that though?
What's the evidence that say they come over here to break the law? No, they come over here to subject themselves to the law because they want to give a better life for themselves and for their offspring. That's what they're here for. They want to stay out of trouble. Getting into trouble sends them back to where they escaped from. I mean, really, how stupid. That's why I say these people are morons. I know you keep saying, but yeah, they have to be. People come over here to cause trouble so they get sent back to the country that they escaped from. No, they come here to make them. That doesn't mean some element of them are not criminals. Among any element of people, you're going to find a criminal element of that. But there's no data that shows their propensity to commit crime is higher than anybody else's propensity to commit crime,
right?
And that the grand majority of them are law-abiding citizens that are trying to make a better life for themselves and doing a reasonably good job at making a better life for themselves, a better life for their kids, and a better life for everyone else that lives here because they're doing productive work. For people, I read that like in the we already know in farms they're about 1/3, to maybe even a little bit higher of the workforce. Nursing homes, also facilities, they're a high percentage of the working force because it's hard for them to get people to to work these jobs, and they're willing to do these jobs. And most of these people who are benefiting, they're not benefiting high income people. They're not benefiting the billionaires. I mean, of course, if they're working in hotels and whatever, yes, they're the investment funds and whatever who own that. But the family farmer, the car washer, these are the small business people. It's not like these small business people are making 7-figure incomes. No, they're lower middle class people, okay, that obviously have to just pay, the best wages that they can afford and stay in business, because it's not like they have huge profit margins, and they can absorb significantly higher salaries and still stay in business. So think about, and if they're not in business, think about how much food we have, people, producing for us, how less accessible car washes are, how service in many places will deteriorate further because they can't hire people. So, people give no consideration to all these factors.
Yeah.
Ryan, you wanted to say something?
Oh, well, I just was going to say that earlier point, not that it's, I agree with your point, just that there are other factors I think are worth considering in that. I think first and foremost, the statistics have been clear for a long time. I always question these, whether they're all, how you can fully grasp this just by taking polls and whatnot. But I do think that the obvious data shows, and I agree with the logic of it, that the majority of people here, and coming from a place where I work in restaurants, different overlaps, the people I worked with in those fields, same thing, where they know they're working hard not to get in trouble, to get removed from the country, but there's a point to be made about the people that do come here for two different reasons that are, criminals with the intent to be criminals. That element is hard to quantify because they're not acting through the normal system, avenues. That's one point to make. So it wouldn't reflect on that stat, I would argue. But then secondarily, the point that people are concerned about, which doesn't challenge the original point, which the majority immigrants are not the ones breaking the law, but there's an element of abuse within that's worth consideration that is real, as much as it's overblown by people that want to assume, of the people that come in through immigration that have intentions for kind of intelligence or, military age males kind of point. There is a valid point to be made about that is used by different countries over the years. So those things are just pointing out why there's a concern about those that may come through that gets overblown by politicians who want to use it against them.
But I think Ryan, think in Abrego Garcia, they trying to prosecute him. These are people they're keeping in the country who have been convicted of crimes, illegal immigrants. They're still in the country, and they're bribed to try to commit perjury because they know they have no case. Right. You're telling us you're concerned about these immigrants committing crimes? You're cosseting them, right? So,
yeah, we all agree on this. Yeah,
it's ridiculous,
Yeah,
because it just depends upon what political advantage we can have of it. And I say that's the problem that we have. There is no principle at all involved in any politics. Everything is an ulterior motive. They don't really believe in anything other than manipulating the public in order to stay or aggrandize power. Right. Anything they say on day one, you can point, well, you're doing the opposite on day two. So we don't really believe it. And that's where and if we jumped over to Epstein, that's the problem with Epstein. Oh, we got the client list. Hey, we got the stuff because they wanted to get the mega people awakened. And then the next day, but there's nothing there,
Or it's a hoax now.
They're not even embarrassed by saying, yeah, we lied to you,
Right.
So why did you believe us? And Trump says it's just a hoax. I don't want your support anymore.
See, this speaks to a whole different problem, though.
Out their support.
I've tried to avoid this because I think sometimes I don't want to make cheap shots.
Yeah.
But we have to remember that all these people who say they're for law and order, they did vote for a president who is a convicted felon. Okay.
True. Yeah.
So I mean, I don't want to say that too often, but because I really don't like to make cheap shots, and I don't want to sound like I'm making personal attacks, but that's not my intention. My intention is to point out the hypocrisy that people who say I believe so much in law and order, I want to deport somebody who committed a civil infraction, not a crime, not what's considered a crime, civil infraction, to cross the border, and not go through the proper documentation process. It's just a civil infraction, and they want to give the maximum sentence to somebody who has a civil infraction. Either that's the only thing they've done, and they've been here for 5, 10, 20 years, built a family, have roots here. They're still willing just to say, I'll disrupt the family, I'll destroy the family. I just want to get them because I believe so much in law and order. But I'm happy to vote for somebody who twice was convicted of committing frauds, And well, he's more than twice really, because he's made payoffs off with respect to Trump University. So so he's had to make other payments, to third parties, that have sued him, in addition to his financial fraud that he
Just
committed,
the minor one, but Jeff,
and the felony that
yeah,
he committed. So
that's just a minor inconsistency. These are the people who said we want to vote for Trump because we want to get rid of the cancel culture. And Trump is the cancel culture, right?
Right.
You don't say anything that he doesn't like.
Both,
They go after you, or the Harvard, or the universities, deport you, whatever. He is the cancel culture, right? So the whole idea that they don't have that, and again, a lot of them were the Christian right, right? We really believe in the Bible and the Sermon on the Mount, whatever. Really? You voted for the devil. You voted for somebody who violates the 10 Commandments, every half hour. So the hypocrisy is far beyond just voting for a felon and claiming they're for law and order.
I agree.
This is a cult. They vote for something that is against their ostensible values all the time. For whatever reason, it's maybe they are just morons, but I think it's because they're part of a tribe, and that's how they get their self esteem. It doesn't have anything to do with intellectual consistency or honesty.
I agree. I think the problem though is that it's about people that have been manipulated. That's the point I always make, is that, and it's not to say that they're all with the best of intentions. I mean, let's be clear. It's obvious that a major thread of this, there's a very clear racist thread that runs through this, of people that just want to go after anybody who's, we could talk about all the negative points, but there are a lot of people in this that I think are actually now beginning to wake up to that point though, Bruce. And that's not to say that they don't have the same points, maybe, the same, whatever we just discussed, whether moral issues or dishonesty or whatever, but they are nonetheless recognizing that whatever they thought he's not even that. Like, that's what's interesting right now, whether it's Epstein or different points. There's a lot of stuff happening right now where people are starting to recognize that he's not even following through with what they were promised, which is just making the point that these people are inherently dishonest and will even throw their own people under the bus to get what they want. I think that's worth pointing out.
Well, I think probably, and we'll have to see what the revelations are right now. I don't want to go far upstream on this because I want to get to the other points you raised, Ryan. But I don't think it's a coincidence, in my opinion, that we're now seeing these releases from Tulsi Gabbard,
right?
With respect to now looking to, it's funny that they want to imprison Obama. This is the president who said that the president should have absolute immunity and that he could go and assassinate his enemies. So, and he should have immunity from it. So I don't know what the basis is. I guess according to him, and it's not unusual, that immunity ruling was unique to him and not to anybody else. So it only applies to him and not any other president. So he can go after Obama, just nobody can go after him. But
I don't think that'll happen.
Right now, and when I've been reading the articles and seeing the releases, the allegations that were made was that Russia was looking to interfere with the elections, and their preferred candidate was Trump. There's been no release so far that narrative is false. Okay, the only release has been with respect to them using a cyber attack to manipulate the vote count through the machines. That's the only thing they presented some documentation on. But and even in the wording, when I say this explosive document, maybe there's more to it than I've read. But the explosive document was that when they had a meeting, Obama said, they got to rewrite the intelligence report or something like that, to have the Russian narrative, which is basically the information they did have. And let's think about the information they did have. They did have a special prosecutor named Mueller, and Mueller got a bunch of convictions in a court of law for Russian interference in the election. The issue is pretty much concluded that Russia did interfere, but they didn't find an evidence of collusion between Russia and Trump. But there is evidence out there that Russia was doing things with social media and other methods, to try and tilt the election for the benefit of Trump and to the detriment, of Hillary Clinton. And they did try and influence the outcome. And and so the question is they did try to get after it, but they were not successful, or that they could not be successful in doing it through a cyber attack. That's all. So it doesn't say that Russians, there's still no evidence out there that Russians didn't try and influence that conclusion has not changed.
Yeah, but
Okay?
the whole thing, to my mind, is ridiculous. The very first covert action of the CIA in 1948 was to influence the outcome of the Italian elections. We don't understand it because it's classified. The United States has been trying to interfere with every election and internal affairs of every country for 50 or 60 or 70 years. I mean, we just cover it up because, we don't leak as much. But when the evidence is out there, all sorts of evidence shows that we've been running around the world, Suriname, everywhere imaginable, Nicaragua. So the idea that our intelligence would be different than a foreign country is ridiculous. Of course, they're going to try to interfere because they think that the result could have an impact upon them. Now, and with regard to my mind, if you want to, that the effort, if you want to do to oversell the Russian narrative, that is, aside from proving that they were trying to interfere, most of them, I think, Jeffrey, were still in Russia, so Mueller could indict them, but he couldn't try them because we don't do trials in absentia. It was Hillary Clinton had to explain how could she lose to this guy, So Hillary Clinton was the one, I believe, who had to try to overstate what the evidence was because she couldn't accept the fact that she was perhaps the worst candidate, since William Henry Harrison. And I do believe you always ask, it seems to me, at the beginning of an inquiry, the cui bono, who benefits from the storyline here? And it's Hillary Clinton is the one who's benefiting, not Barack Obama. So that's where we are. But again, it's just as laughable. Oh, Russia's trying to interfere with our election. Well, we interfere with every other country's elections for 75 years.
Well, my thought on this is, the point of interference itself, like the obvious point to begin with is what I said when this was first happening. Did anybody doubt that that's always happening, that every country's trying to influence to their benefit, like Bruce pointed out, because they know whoever gets in there, there'll be a difference based on how they engage with them. But that's not to say that I think that you necessarily prove that this was the Russian government doing so. Like even the memes point, which is very small. I don't think that was ever definitively proven that it was the Russian government, but more so Russian entities, and so this becomes really convoluted. But I still argue that it was just probably likely the case. But the point is in regard to the idea of whether or not they made all of that, tried to create, whether Clinton and Obama or just Clinton, the point of you can frame it as overblowing it. But I think it was more of kind of just creating a false narrative around what it was, for obvious reasons. And I think the point is that the documents they put out do show that. They do show that we're all seemingly acknowledge there was some kind of a manipulation of the lie around it. But my point to all of it, as we're kind of getting at, is that it's clearly one, as Jeffrey pointed out, the timing is ridiculous. It's so very clearly like, look over there, to something that I think most people have already accepted. Secondarily, I'm willing to bet you anything that Obama does not, whether he even gets investigated necessarily, I do not think he'll ever get held accountable, because I don't think they're ever really at odds with each other when it comes to the government itself. But that's how I see it.
But that's nice. Another thing to remember is, in Trump, it was Trump who, after the Hillary emails, were released, said, "I hope they do it more." You're right. So that it's obvious whether he.
Well, Trump invited the Russians to find more stuff on her.
Yeah, so
he wanted the Russians to go into her servers and see what more they can get. Later, he said it was a joke, but a lot of people, so far, I think most, if you've gone to the FBI and go to Comey or anyone else, and they say, "I just was kidding," they're not going to believe you. But we're supposed to believe when Trump said it, he was just kidding. Yeah. So
that's his way, though, of like throwing it down the middle. Where he's like, for his mind, it's kind of always both, right?
They did have the meeting in Trump Tower. They did take the meeting. Okay. So we don't know what would have happened if the people they met actually had something of substance. Okay. They left the meeting because there was no substance there. Okay. So, but they took the meeting. They took the meeting for a reason. Okay. They didn't say, "Gee, this person has jump truck. I don't want to know it. I don't want to be near it." No, they went to the meeting. They wanted to hear what they had to say. And then what just happened, it just happened to be a waste of time. So for them to sit back and say, "Well, we weren't really colluding," we don't know, because the one opportunity that they did, because Trump was inviting people to go after and hack Hillary Clinton and get classified files. So he did invite people to get classified files. He was hoping that they would be successful at doing that. And if anything, the actions of the Obama administrations, that's really, the whole point of election interference against Trump is so much garbage, because whatever the FBI did hurt Hillary, not Trump. You know, when they
Yeah.
came out just a few days before the election, you know, with the statement when they got more files from was it Weiner with
Tony Weiner's wife. Yeah.
his wife? Yes,
Weiner's
the one who worked with for Hillary.
I think the point was that Trump was supposed to be put. I think that was my personal opinion is that this was in some way, maybe not the entirety of government, but another element to create I think Trump was supposed to be in that position. I think somebody wanted that, if not the entire thing. That's my opinon on it, though. Just like we see now. Let me explain why.
You know,
I think
maybe they didn't have the Hunter stuff. Well, that was 2020. Sorry, 2016. But that really hurt Hillary. Okay,
right.
That might have lost Hillary the election. Was that announcement just several days before? You know that they were investigating her again. So instead of just keeping it quiet and doing nothing,
it wasn't just that. It was because Comey, because I worked at the department, the FBI director doesn't make prosecution decisions. That's the attorney general, especially at this level. Comey was the one who said, I'm going to reopen the investigation, decide whether to prosecute. He doesn't have, the FBI director doesn't do that. Even J. Edgar Hoover never made that claim when he had Bobby Kennedy around. It's a ridiculous assertion, and it clearly hurt her. You know, because Comey, for maybe it was unwitting, clearly cast a cloud over her candidacy, and it was a close race. It wasn't a landslide in 2016, and that's certainly a legitimate grievance. But that's kind of aside from what we're talking about now. Mm-hmm. And I think the whole idea of foreign interference is, in terms of impact as well, I think it's ambivalent. I think most people, if they think one candidate's being favored by a foreign country, is not going to vote for the candidate, you know, for sure. That's why, you know, the United States tries to interfere with Iran. And as soon as a candidate says, they say, don't give us any money, don't give us any support, because as soon as the Iranians think the United States is going to do another Mossadegh, we're going to lose our support. They don't want the foreign support because it makes it look like you're disloyal.
Right.
So,
my theory is this, okay?
Yeah.
Trump knows his voters are very dumb, okay? So given the fact they're very dumb, they're easy to influence by propaganda. Yeah. So clearly they're threatened by third parties changing the propaganda from the narrative they want to have because they think people are very easily influenced by them because they're dumb. So maybe both parties think most of the people out there are pretty dumb and therefore easily influenced by propaganda. So they want to control the propaganda that people are exposed to, and they want to make sure that people are not exposed to the propaganda that's inconvenient for them. You know, but you know, I agree with you, Bruce. At the end of the day, we just need to have stuff disclosed, and it's people's responsibility to not be dumb. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I do think that our government grossly underestimates the average intelligence of the American people.
Overestimates or under? So you think the government thinks people are smart, are smarter than they really are?
Yeah.
Ryan, is that your point? Ryan? Oh, I think Ryan froze.
You get frozen?
Yes, I think we lost Ryan here.
Associate that. I think the American people, I don't think that they're purposely obtuse, but they don't educate themselves. They don't understand the importance of process over personalities. And they believe in miracles and all sorts of ridiculous things because they want their hopes, you know, to turn into reality. And they live on their hopes, and the demagogues exploit that. And I think, unfortunately, it gets worse each year because our educational system is totally decayed and decrepit. You don't read, you don't write, you don't have critical thinking inculcated anymore. At best, you know, students look at AI and they give all the answers, and you find even professors teaching from AI. Yeah, that's not how you develop critical thinking. And it was Jefferson again who said, you can't have a free country that's ignorant. That if you think you can be free and ignorant at the same time, you're deluding yourself. And that's why the framers stressed education at every moment, and education in the sense of being philosophically deep and using critical faculties to decide what is true or not and where your best interests lie. And that's no government today does that. They just they use education as a weapon to try to indoctrinate people in ideas that they think will give them and strengthen their power.
Yeah, I've mentioned in the past that at the University of Chicago, where I went to school, they had a program of that at the Committee on Social Thought, and that program had what was called a PERL program, PERL, and what it stands for Politics, Economics, Rhetoric, and Law, and it was based upon Ben Franklin's philosophy towards what every good citizen should be required to know, that every citizen should have working knowledge of politics, economics, rhetoric, and law. And that should be an obligation of every citizen. And if citizens were not well educated in all those areas, if they didn't understand how politics work, if they didn't understand that law is the infrastructure for society, they didn't understand how how important economics are, and rhetoric, because we should know how to communicate and debate and discuss with each other. Then
System was going to crumble. Yeah.
That was required for every citizen. So the fact is, and he said the primary goal of education first should be make people good citizens, and the secondary role of education is to provide them the skills necessary to make a living. So, but they have an obligation of both being good citizens, and being able to be independent and making life for themselves, so that every American should have knowledge in those areas: politics, economics, rhetoric, and law. So that's one of the things that appealed to me. And when I went to study at Chicago, was the Committee on Social Thought, because I wanted to be a good citizen, and the idea of how do we organize ourselves as a good government, have good governance, was topics that were very, very interesting to me, and I agree that nobody can be a good citizen, because they can't be informed. And we express our preferences through voting, but we should be informed when we vote, and we're not informed when we vote. And so therefore, if we're uninformed voters, we're bad citizens.
Yeah. And also, the people who occupy office oftentimes need citizen input, because citizens in various ways can be much smarter and intelligent than the people who are elected to office. And so your contribution isn't just the ballot box. Tell them, what about X? What about Y? What about Z? We know that one of Thomas Jefferson's greatest contributions was establishing the University of Virginia and recruiting the best professors he could find in the United States and in Europe, to upgrade our educational standards. And there oftentimes it's the private sector knows more than the government sector, and you give them the government's ideas. This is a better way to build a better mousetrap.
Well, nothing processes information better than capital markets. The marketplace is the collective wisdom of the people working in cooperation and in competition, and so nothing processes information and reflects preferences better than skin in the game in markets.
Yeah, but
can I make a point?
Been more than that.
Go ahead, Ryan.
Let me just comment, and then Ryan, you take over. But it's more than that, I think, Jeffrey, at least in one important respect, and that is, in the private sector, you get immediate feedback. And if you don't respond to the feedback and learn from your errors, you go bankrupt, right?
Right.
So the premium on learning from your errors. That doesn't work that way in government. You keep going down the same road, don't learn anything from anything. Look like 20 years of Afghanistan. We learned nothing for 20 years other than how to waste $2.3 trillion, because there isn't any penalty for refusing to adapt to the new input and information. There is in the private sector. That's why it works so much better than in government. Government continues down this stupidity for 50, 60, 100 years. Go ahead, Ryan.
Well, I missed a part of the conversation. Sorry, I lost power there for a minute. But just based on where I came back in, I do have a comment about the point of good citizen and informed voting. I mean, you guys, I think, know my opinion on voting today. Not that it's not important, but if in a state of society, it is paramount. But my thought from this is, first of all, being well-informed, I think, is paramount in any context, right? Just understanding the situation around you, especially if you're going to, believe you're participating in a voting process, you need to understand these things, not just vote on emotion or statements made and promises. But I have an issue when it comes to this, and this is where I'm more of a, not a statist at the end of the day. I don't really believe in government, and I feel like it almost sounds that's where you're leaning, Bruce, these days. But it's like the problem is that it's, at least it's very corrupt today, and I agree with you on that. But that, like, being a good citizen, I think I would argue more of just being a good person or being moral and following your principles and acting with integrity. Not that has to be the way you are in regard to your government. I think being skeptical and adversarial toward your government is the most important thing for any person existing in that relationship. Is holding their feet to the fire when you believe in them.
Right. What you're saying, an ideal citizen is someone who recognizes there is no need for government.
Yeah. Well, I know we agree on that.
That's the ideal citizen. If the ideal citizen exists, or decent citizens exist, the more decent citizens we have, the more decent citizens we have, the less demand there is for government. So the greater the demand for government, the less decent citizens we are. Because the more we demand government, the more we demand something for nothing. And you can't be a good citizen if you want things for other people to pay for. Okay. Yeah. So you just can't be, you're not a good citizen, and you're not a good human being.
Yeah, okay? But the reason why, Jeffrey, you can do that, at least with limited government, I am almost for almost nothing other than law enforcement, is that through checks and balances. That's the Madisonian genius. You can get government to control itself because you have the sociopaths fighting each other, and it creates what we call logjam, or to prevent the horrors from happening. But I believe with Hobbes, in a state of nature, we are all poor, beautiful, nasty, and short life. But I do think that the idea, and here I would add on what you said, Ryan. The Department of Justice says eternal vigilance is the price of liberty, and that's why you have to be suspicious more of government than private sector, because it can do so much more harm. That's why the obligation is so much more intense, because they got a monopoly of violence and money. So you really have to pay attention, and that's. And I do believe that's something that needs to be inculcated in the home, in the pulpit, in the synagogues, and the mosques, and in the classroom. Because if you don't look at the government, they're going to steal you blind in a second.
Especially when those two things merge, like we're talking about, like the fascistic overlap of those two things, that becomes even more problematic, right? When it's the private industry is then kind of merged with the government, which is where we are today.
Yes. Yeah, you're exactly right. And again, that goes back to why we need to downsize government. And it can be done in a way that's decent, not the Trump way. You can transition, you can have grandfather clauses, as long as the pendulum is working in the right direction. We're okay. It doesn't have to happen overnight, but there has to have an understanding of why we are downsizing government. It's because we recognize the primacy of the reason for government at all is to give individual dignity to each person, to have an opportunity to march to their own drummer. That's the greatness of a country, not square miles. It's not how many countries that we can bomb to smithereens, or how many atomic bombs we can drop on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or bestride the world like a colossus. Our greatness is preserving and honoring the integrity of every individual with the dignity for due process. And you get to decide whether you want to build a better mousetrap or play a guitar. You'll comply with the law. That's okay. We're all equal. I say the best phrase I can think of to describe it is, every man and a woman's a king and queen, but no one wears a crown. That's what makes the United States different than any other country in the world.
Yeah, well, we know Trump's role of the perspective on downsizing government, which means getting rid of anyone who goose step blind obedience to him. So,
while actually growing the government and claiming opposite, which is what he's really doing. The government's larger at this point than it was before.
We'll go back. This is Trump, and it's not just Trump. The one part of government that grows every single year with no oversight is the military-industrial security complex.
Right.
They have increased. Trump is increasing that military-industrial complex more than all the savings that Doge had combined.
Right.
And there isn't any debate.
He's expanding it not only internationally but domestically, because that's what the spending on the militarization of with ICE, people who don't have to comply with the same type of restrictions that the police have to, are constrained by. So they're explaining a military force, a paramilitary force in this country is basically replacing the police department with the huge budget of the $175 billion paramilitary force that can just pick people up off the streets and send them to any country. And so those are circumstances. Let's get back to this topic.
But
Brian, do you want to give the example? You want to talk about this person who you may refer to?
Jeffrey, I want one additional point to add to what you've been saying, and Ryan, and that is, if the United States military has nothing to do other than to try to defend against unarmed women and children entering the United States and going to chase after immigrants who comply with the law more than citizens, then our Pentagon is way too big. That is an earmark that we are the safest country in the history of the world. That's what we're using our soldiers for? Really? In terms of police? And that's just an example of how far gone we are into this military industrial security complex.
And they're supposedly using DEA and FBI and people from other agencies. So apparently they had a lot of people who had nothing better to do. So,
well, no, actually, Jeffrey, one of the things that really killed me in the beginning of this, referencing Melnick again, the lawyer, from the Immigration Council, he called this out right in the beginning. He testified about this. They pulled a whole bunch of people from investigations around sexual trafficking, around child trafficking, and directed them to go after immigrants that aren't really committing any, we all know the reality of that. And so interestingly, a group that is, the conservative side of this, that's been calling out in many cases, rightly so, the child trafficking aspect of this. And then suddenly he pulls people away from it to go after immigrants. It just feels like a contradiction, or rather, challenging of what they originally asked him to do. I thought that was really interesting.
No, but again, it goes to show that we are the safest country in the world if we got resources to go, if that's the priority. It's a priority over solving murder, over solving, theft, rape, or whatever. I mean, even the murders, where they have a clearance rate of what's called 2/3. That is, a third of murders in the United States, we don't even have an arrest. And we're chasing after law enforcement over an immigrant, who's working at McDonald's.
Right.
I mean, that's not crazy. I don't know what is.
Or ask any one of these local.
Because obviously the immigrant working at McDonald's is much more dangerous to our national security than murderers.
Yeah. Well, but ask any one of these local police departments about their rape kits. I mean, this is a horrible story. Any state you look in, they've got shelves full of these things. They barely even investigate. It's horrifying.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'll go to this example, Jeffrey, if you want to go that direction. I have it down below if you want to bring it up. It's actually, I have a thought to share with this, and we can go into it if you guys would like. But this example is of a U.S. veteran, U.S. citizen, who was put on suicide watch, which is weird that they make that kind of the title, because the big story to me is the fact that he was there doing his job legally. He's a U.S. citizen and a veteran, and was scooped up by ICE and imprisoned for a period of time, and without even given the option to prove that he was a U.S. citizen. It's insane to me. But I want, just on the point from before about ICE and the Gestapo kind of idea, I think it's worth at least considering the possibility. Like, we put it this way: hypothetically, if there was, let's just even say a force from within this country, or maybe a foreign country, that wanted to transition power, not in a way that we would all go, oh, look at what's happening, but like a secret which I think has happened throughout, the world in plenty of ways that we can look back now and notice there was a quiet kind of soft coup that happened, right? And if that was what was happening, and I'm not even saying I necessarily believe that, it's something I consider. Would it not look something like this, like some kind of slow, like massive rolling force that's coming through? That's weird. And then add something like this makes me continue to think that it seems to be almost like over-focusing, or rather, taking actions like this to kind of destroy the fabric of this country. I just want to float that out there. If you guys want to talk on that first, go ahead.
Brian, I want to expand on that, and then I'm interested in hearing what Bruce has to say.
Yeah.
One is, this story is a horrendous story about this person. I encourage people to read on up. Yes, he was a contracted security, so he was not working directly for that farm. He was working for a company, so he was a third-party contractor. So he had no direct relationship with the business itself. He was just working for a third party that had contracted out security, and he was one of the people hired and this is somebody who left as a disabled veteran, and so he provided security. He showed up for work. He was in his car. He saw the mess. When he saw the mess, he said, "I want to get out of there." He couldn't move. He as what he's asserted, and I watched the interview on TV with him. He asserted that he was getting multiple instructions, that he should move, that he should stay. Finally, they broke into his window, dragged him out. He tried to tell them that he was a citizen, that he was a former Marine, that he was a vet. They didn't care. They threw him to the ground. They cuffed him. They detained him. He missed his daughter's birthday. He got overstressed. I guess, part of it, maybe he had, post-traumatic stress disorder from the military, and that's why he left as a disabled vet. And then he was on suicide watch. He was there for 3 days and let go and never had an explanation on any of this stuff. So I guess in 3 days they couldn't fabricate a case against him. So they felt that they had to let him go because they couldn't fabricate him, and they confirmed maybe at that point in time that he was a U.S. citizen and his story was true. And then going back to Tuberville's comments, well, because he was near illegals, he deserved it. I mean, because that's Tuberville's. That's the attitude of this government. If you're near, and you're supposed to know people are illegal. Every time any place you're out in the public, you're supposed to know who's illegal out there.
Unless they're the ones on the farms that Trump says are okay, right? Then you're supposed to know the difference.
So this is really, a horrible story. I think people, I keep using this term, you got to be sick to think this is okay, that somebody has a job, they're showing up for work, there's no probable cause, there's no reasonable cause, there's just the power to abuse it, and then of course, when you get a cop who's convicted of a civil rights violation, that can have a long-term sentence, and then the DOJ goes in and says, 1 day seems sufficient to me, and that's the recommendation from the DOJ. I mean, that means you have kind of a sense of, immunity there, that if the government prosecutes you and convicts you, which they know this attorney general will never do, they'll go in there and they'll have you back, and you have basically immunity to waive. So everyone out there, I'm sure everyone ICE agent knows that they have pretty much immunity. I know that almost nothing will get charges against. How could you have the photos, the images of those people shooting at journalists where they targeted them in LA, have no charges be made against them? Okay. Right. How could they do that? Somebody has had to tell them, you just do whatever you want to do. Don't worry. This administration has our back. Commit any violence, any force you think is appropriate, and whatever, as long as they're a bad guy, okay, this administration will have your back. So of course they're encouraged to be lawless. They're encouraged to think that they have no restrictions. I'm pretty sure. I mean, I'm just me speculating, so I can't say it as a fact. But the evidence to me seems to be that they're behaving as if that they don't have to care about the law. There's no one, because if you look, going back to what we talked about, how much the administration is ignoring the judges, all the evidence they have is reinforcing the fact is that they can get away with anything.
Right.
I think, Jeffrey and Ryan, the problem has been compounded over years by the U.S. Supreme Court, because there's civil actions too. They used to be able to file, suits under the Fourth Amendment, unreasonable search and seizure. You get damages against these guys. At least it's some deterrent. And the government can't control private causes of action. But the Supreme Court has emasculated that. So you have qualified immunity, absolute immunity for prosecutors. So the court itself, by, I think, odd interpretations of federal law enacted, after the Civil War, have destroyed the ability of the private individual to at least get redress for the harm to themselves. They can't sue anymore, which is ridiculous. And I've urged Congress to make it clear that anybody whose constitutional rights have been violated should be able to sue and get damages, not any immunities, not qualified, not absolute immunity. If the government has defaulted on its obligation to protect your exercise of constitutional rights, it ought to pay up. Strict liability. For the private sector, it's got strict liability. If a corporation does something as a defective product and it hurts you, you get sued, you get damages. That should be even more true under the Constitution. And this is an example, of, in my view, of the Supreme Court throwing its separation of powers out the window, deferring to the executive branch once again, as we end up with more and more one branch government.
Right.
Because really the only check on the ability of the executive branch to manipulate the prosecution function, because only the government can initiate a prosecution, and you can't force a government attorney to ask questions and to try to get a jury sworn to convict, is private lawsuits that are not hamstrung by that. And the Supreme Court has basically made that impossible.
Well, let me add a couple more points to the article that I just think, and really just reiterate the idea that we're talking about a U.S. citizen and a veteran, and from the perspective of the Trump supporters out there that don't want to acknowledge this is happening, this is one of many, many examples. But as Jeffrey already highlighted the process of it all, there's a couple extra points to add to it, that he was pepper sprayed and tear gassed. And not allowed to even give the opportunity to identify himself or explain that he was a citizen. He was just grabbed and taken with no investigation. And again, they put him in suicide watch, no explanation why. They didn't let him shower. They didn't give him a phone call. As you said, he missed his daughter's birthday, and then just let him go with no explanation. If we don't recognize by now that this is the most rampantly lawless, this is either, like I discussed, something shifting, or just the reality of what I kind of think our government's always been, and pulling the mask off. Either way, we're here now, and we have to acknowledge what this is.
What did Tricia McLaughlin say, the spokesperson? What did she say? Did this guy get issued apology? No. What did she say? Well, we haven't had enough time to figure out what crime he committed.
Right.
Just give us more time and we'll figure it out. Don't worry. We'll keep looking at the videos, and maybe and we still hope we can find something that we can. This is their mentality. Rather than just saying we messed up, we apologize. This should not happen in this country. Their comment is, well, give us more time. We'll figure out something. Now, we know they're never going to figure something out, but it's an explanation that just got them out of the moment, and then people will forget, and they'll move on to another issue, and nobody will care what happened to this individual. They would care if it happened to them, okay, but they won't care about what happened to this individual. And as you said, Ryan, this is not just happening to this person, it's happening to other people as well, which is also why Tuberville made the comment he made, because he knows it's not just happening, it's not just one case. There are more cases, and he's basically saying, be ready for even more cases.
I
just want to make one more point, Bruce.
Okay.
Because this is based upon something that you always make, and also going back to what Ryan always makes. We're paying this $175 billion budget, okay, to have this paramilitary force in the country. Okay, let's assume that they actually are successful in mass deportations. What are they going to do next?
Right.
What are they going to do next? They're going to be disbanded, or what's the plan for them after? Okay. Because I think that's a point you would make, Ryan, and that's a point, Bruce, you would make. What are they going to do after?
If that's a question, it's going to continue to be there. Like go ahead, Bruce. Go ahead.
We already know what they're going to do after. If we just look at it abroad. Okay, the Soviet Union fell. Now we got to find a new bugbear, international terrorism. Then that recedes. Then we go after China. After China gets something, then don't worry, we'll invent some other.
No, they're going to come after us.
That's what I think.
But the point I wanted to make, Jeffrey and Ryan, the point I want to make, you're only going to change this if you change the institutional incentives. That's why I say the reason why they persist, they never get sued. They got immunity. So not only do they get no criminal prosecution, they're not going to have to pay any damages, nothing. That's why you have to give the victims rights of action to sue and get redress of grievances. Otherwise, you tell them, no, listen, why shouldn't I do this? There's no downside risk to it. The upside to them is I get in the good graces of Trump. They're not stupid. They know exactly what the incentive structure is. Only Congress can change this by changing the law to make clear that the victims of constitutional violations have a right to civilly sue the defendants for damages and recover. That will provide a deterrent effect.
I agree. But to Jeffrey's point, I agree with that too, though. I think that the obvious nature, it explains itself. Look around. They're scattered among states. They're across this country. There's funding that goes on well beyond this for more than most militaries. Guys, this is the Gestapo. This is an internal enforcement body. I don't see how, I don't even think, I'm sure with how they've acted every other way, they could just throw ICE in some other country if they wanted to, like they don't care about the law. But the logic point is it's an internal domestic enforcement, and that's not going to go away. As Bruce points out every time, they never let go of power. So it's going to be there forever. And the immigration point will either never be solved, which certainly possible, or they will. And to Jeffrey's point, it then will move on to somebody else. Simple.
And because nobody's thinking a couple of years ahead and asking that question. What are you going to do when these people completed the job? You built all this infrastructure. What are you going to do with all this infrastructure? You bought this infrastructure, you built this infrastructure, you hired all these people, you built this paramilitary force. Okay, you spent $175 billion you've invested in it this year. You're going to spend a lot more money in ongoing years, and you're going to tell me after you finish with the mass deportations, and then now that so what Trump said, the border's already closed. So we have a closed border, and now we're just doing mass deportations. So we're doing mass deportations on the most part of people who are not a threat to anyone's security. So, and they're not invaders. Okay, so why? I'm surprised. Nobody has asked it. Well, I shouldn't be so surprised because people are so fucking stupid. But but to ask the question, what are you going to do? Going back to Bruce, once you have that power, who's going to give that up? I, the president, control this paramilitary force that's more powerful than any army in the world, and I have control of it domestically. Who's going to give that up?
And then imagine when Democrats come into power in the next administration. To your point, Jeffrey, they don't think beyond how this will apply to them next.
Let me give two examples there. Maybe they're not directly on point, but I mean, one of the reasons why Harry Truman decided to drop atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, despite Dwight Eisenhower and Admiral Ley saying we don't need to do this, we've already won the war, is because his Secretary of State Jimmy Burns said, "Listen," he said, "Truman, we've already spent over $2 billion on the bomb. What is Congress going to say? They wasted the money. So we got to use it. You've developed something, you got to use it." And then I also remember famous or infamous Madeleine Albright, Secretary of State to Colin Powell. "Hey, Colin, we got this wonderful, great armed forces, the best in the history of the world. We got to use it, right? We got to use it. It's on the shelf. We can't just have it sit there." So anytime you create this power, you create this new ultra method of doing bad things to people, they're going to use it because that's their only justification.
And if you think about this marriage between this sociopathic government and the sociopathic tech sector, like this person Karp and the type of statements he's made from Palantir,
right?
Okay, really sociopathic comments. And the partnership they have in this surveillance state with all the AI. Think about how much, and this is something I think I'm going to bring up right now. The government has said we don't want CBDCs. Okay, let me tell you why CBDCs are inconvenient for the government. If the government is a central bank digital currency, still, if the government wants access to that information, they'll have to get warrants to get it, because they can't just ask for a government entity to get all that information because we have an independent central bank. Okay, so given the fact that the central bank still is independent, okay, it's not like the government could just say, "I want all this information because I asked for it. You got to give it." We have no obligation. But now, if I go out and I let Goldman Sachs have their stable coin, and if I have Wells Fargo have their stable coin, and Bank of America and Citibank and Morgan Stanley and everybody issues their own stable coins, all those stable coins will be regulated by me. And now I don't need a warrant for any of the information. I'll just say you have a regulatory requirement of sharing all this information with me. So now I can have all the information I want. Okay, I still control the stable coins because I control the printing of dollars. So it's still under my control. But now I can get all this information without having the inconvenience of going out and getting a warrant and dealing with this independent central bank. No, I can go get the entities I have complete governance over through the regulatory machines, and now I can get all the information I want, and I can build this into my super surveillance state model. So people think that doing it this way is actually protecting their privacy, but it's not protecting their privacy. It's just letting them be abused by not only people in the government, but other people in the private sector have become partners with the government in this surveillance. So
we already got a dress rehearsal right after 9/11. The United States went to AT&T, said, "Hey, we want to listen in without warrants to all the communications you have." AT&T's got huge government contracts, right? They said, "Okay, go ahead and do it." And then no warrants, nothing. because there was a partnership between AT&T and the government, all of our Fourth Amendment rights went out the window. They said, here, go ahead. They had a government office that was out in San Francisco that was hearing all the communications, everything that was going through the AT&T system. So we know that, and Jeffrey, what you're described here is just an upgrade from what already happened after 9/11 and the telecommunications network. They turned it over to the government without any warrants whatsoever.
Well, and to be clear, what you're highlighting there, Jeffrey, is so Trump is continuing to promise that he's not going to be, no CBDCs. But the issue, I don't know if you're familiar with Catherine Austin Fitts, very high, expert in the financial field. We used to work with the HUD and different government overlaps. But so basically that a stable coined version of the same is way, way worse. And that's what Jeffrey, I believe, is getting at, is that this direction is kind of a head fake to act like we're not going to do the thing you all highlighted as a problem, but we built it in a way that now is exponentially worse. I have a video down there if you want to play it from the president of BIS, outlining exactly why, kind of the overlap of both, but why programmable money, which is what the stable coin is, and CBDC, the way they're using the stable coins, but the stable coin version is way worse for this reason. If you want to play that,
I know Agustin Costans.
Yeah.
Analysis on CBDC, in particular for the use of general use, we tend to establish the equivalence with cash, and there is a huge difference there. For example, in cash, we don't know, for example, who's using a $100 bill today. We don't know who is using a 1,000 peso bill today. A key difference with the CBDC is that central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability. And also, we will have the technology to enforce that. Those two issues are extremely important, and that makes a huge difference with respect to what cash is.
So programmable money that they can turn on and off. They can access, especially if you talk about geofencing as well and how that can apply in certain areas. But the point, though, is he's saying that in the context of CBDCs, but it applies to just programmable money in the digital sense. Right. And so, and the stable coin makes it so much worse. And so, go ahead. I just want to throw that in there because that's where we are right now. It's where it's going.
Yes, yeah. I know Agustin Costans. I've had several meetings with him back when Mexico had its problems in the mid-90s, and we actually participated in a conference at University of Chicago that was reviewing what happened in Mexico in the mid-90s when it had when they had the Tesa Bono problems and their interest rates went over 100%. I actually helped design the plan that got Mexico back its credit rating, and as the head of the central bank and one of the finance ministers had great respect for me. So I made a lot of structural suggestions regarding structural reforms, of which numerous of them got implemented. So I got to have a number of meetings with Agustin, and we kind of had a heated argument at Chicago because I called him a fucking liar there. So,
but the point that
he kind of got heated he had made this statement, and I called him out on it. He didn't say anything after that, but he certainly was not very happy with me.
Yeah, one point that I want to make is this is not, there is a remedy for this. It's called the Congress of the United States enacting statutes that protect our privacy. Even if the Fourth Amendment, as interpreted by the Supreme Court, doesn't, Congress can go above the Fourth Amendment floor. And what's stunning is they just do nothing. Mm-hmm. This
is the point that our mutual friend Amy Peikoff has pushed with the third party doctrine, which I know that if the government wants information from you, they should only be able to get it from you, and they should never ask third parties unless they have probable cause and go to a court and go to a judge and get a third party and present that evidence to do that. So,
but Congress can legislate that even if the courts don't require it under the Fourth Amendment. And Congress is doing nothing to protect our privacy. They're in cahoots with big tech. They get the money, the political action committees. And so I'm just saying to our audience,
they want power and control. Knowledge is power. Knowledge is control. They want the knowledge, They don't want to be bothered by protecting our privacy. They want to, their motivation is to strip us of our privacy. And the only way we'll get our privacy protected is if we throw out everybody who doesn't protect our privacy.
Yes, that's
But we're not
exactly.
prepared to do that. We're not prepared to throw out everyone that's trying to strip us of our privacy.
But this is
So
where I bring up that point again about how all these pieces, when you look at the bigger picture, seem to suggest that there's something shifting in this country. Like that, right. The idea that is, what has led to this. And we could argue, as I think you've made some excellent points in the past, Bruce, of how we just kind of logically end up here because of the way this country has gone. But with everything else happening, you could argue in the same point of like a technocratic dynamic, or Palantir in the tech field, Silicon Valley, like maybe there is some kind of transition into that new style of governance. I just can't stop seeing all these different points where it's as if everything's kind of acting in unison to drive us into either kind of a collapse breaking point or some kind of shift in power. And that very well could just be the natural reaction of where we are in this country's, the government's issues. But I think it's worth considering that. It's hard not to see that with all these kind of, you could look at it this way too, that it could just be that people recognize the weakness of the current status of this government, and people even within this government are trying to kind of wage for more power in their own right. But it's hard not to see this stuff. I don't know if you guys agree with that, but I just feel like there's clear examples of things like that we should consider.
I go back. I just think that the turning point of downward cycle came when we abandoned the Declaration of Independence, understanding that our greatness, our honor, our valor was celebrating individual dignity, the right of every individual to develop their faculties, to pursue their ambitions, and had nothing to do with going abroad in search of monsters to destroy, had nothing to do with it dropping atomic bombs and telling other people how to live their lives. That was the greatness. We give dignity to each individual. And once we made a Faustian bargain, we really did. Let's replace the British Empire, which is what we began to do around the turn of the century. When you have an empire, you have to have a Caesar, and you have to have a government that does everything, and it's all secret, whatever. You can't run an empire with individuals being the center of the universe. And we have to change that entire cultural understanding, get back to 1776, which is a good idea after 250 years, and say, that's the difference. What we conceived as the purpose and the greatness of the United States was giving glory to the individual liberty, not giving glory to the government because we could march abroad and squash and bomb any other country in the world with drones. And if we don't get there, it's all going the one-way street. Government gets bigger and bigger, and we control everything that we can get our hands on. We're like an octopus, and the individual gets completely crushed. The framers would have been horrified at what happened. You described that as a U.S. citizen being suddenly, without any remedy at all,
right,
being treated, like an animal, somebody who's illegal, without any protections of due process or otherwise. And you point out this happens here, and people shrug shoulders, move on.
I read, talking about the disutility of voting, because as Ryan said, I don't vote, and Bruce, in your own way, you vote, but yours is an irrelevant vote because you don't vote for anyone that's actually running for office. So, right. So for all intents and purposes, we don't even bother going to the polls. You want to exercise your right, so you make a point, but then you also won't vote for any of the clowns that are on the ballot. So you at least are not going to be manipulated to thinking that when I vote, I can only express, I can only have to vote for the people the parties throw up at me, that I can reject the concept that I have to give them any support, and I can throw a name in that I want to throw in, and at least I say I voted.
I would do something similar if they allowed us abstention, which it should be on the ballot. Go ahead. I just want to add that.
Yeah, but I read an article a couple of days ago, and that article says that right now, the last couple of congressional elections, the time determining contestability was an election won in a congressional district by less than 5%. That only about 7% of the congressional districts are contestable. Think about what the political parties have had. When we talk about what's going on, and we haven't talked about it, but when you read about what's going on in Texas, where they're basically trying to gerrymander Texas to get basically right now, Democrats vote about 43% of the population vote Democratic, but they're like only 20-something percent that 27% or something like that of the local representatives there, while they get 43% of the vote. So there's disproportional representation. When you have disproportional representation, that's kind of like people saying some votes count more than other people's votes, and they accomplish this through gerrymandering, and apparently it's legal to gerrymander, to produce these outcomes. And both parties have been so successful at gerrymandering that we have all these districts that are basically not contestable, and we only have a few districts that are contestable. And so every year it's just checking those contestable districts, and every year each parties are trying to make more and more districts less contestable. So pretty much what's the will of the people if districts are organized so that you can have 50% of the population voting for one party, and that people have no representatives in Congress, even though half the state is voting for that party? And I'm talking about Democrat or Republican. I'm not saying this is a Democratic thing or a Republican thing. No, it's the corrupt DC thing, okay? It's the uniparty thing, and the people think MAGA is not playing this game. Well, MAGA's just announced that they're going to play this game, and they want to play it more aggressively. And the game they want to play, let's be clear, is to disenfranchise voters, okay? That's the game. And again, MAGA's not just the only one playing this game, but MAGA now wants to get even better at it, and which might incentivize, the Democrats to figure out how to get better at it. And the consequence will be a loss of the fact is that the will of the people's voice will be more and more suppressed, because who represents them in Congress is not really a reflection of who voted for them. They just manufactured these districts at a point to make sure that they get, that they put all the Republicans, all the Democrats, they put in one or two districts, and then they spread everything out, or the Democrats will do the same, to Republicans. So we have disproportional representation in every state, which means disenfranchisement in every state, which of course makes voters discouraged, and maybe they like that. Maybe they like discouraged voters, and the whole idea is to discourage the other people's voter to not show up and vote, and to encourage your people to show up and vote. And so that's why, when we sit back and say we're a democracy or a constitutional republic, it's all a joke. What the government has done very well is having a large percentage of the population feeling so disenfranchised that they don't want to even waste their time voting, because they think their vote is irrelevant. And how is it irrelevant? Because the same people get reelected over and over again, and we get this disproportional representation. And when they both get in power, they each do the same thing. They just keep spending money and spending money and spending money, and people say, really, is there any significant difference? That's why they focus on these cultural issues, because the main difference is on the margin. It's that if they put together a budget, their budgets don't really look significantly different from each other. Just the rhetoric is significantly different. But at the end of the day, if you take a look at government spending and when they put a budget together, how they allocate money is not really significantly different from one party to the next.
No, I think, Jeffrey, that's like 90 to 95% of the budget is agreed upon. You take the entitlement programs in the Defense Department, and that's 90% of the budget. And then you obviously got the interest payments on $36 trillion in national debt. And that's why Trump's budget, the irony, and the reason why Thomas Massey told me that he voted against it, he says, this is Biden's budget. He says, right, with lipstick. It's Biden's budget with lipstick. Why the heck would he vote for it? But the Trump people would just utter whatever he wanted them to say about it. It goes back again, the issue, the kinds of people that we are attracting to politics, gets worse and worse each year, because the more at stake at elections, because we got more money to spend, we got more global projection of power, the worse people get attracted to those offices. And that's why you can look today's members compared to go back to the first Congresses. You had Madison's, and then you had Daniel Webster's and Henry Clay's, whatever, Thomas Hart Benton. You got nothing like that today. Nothing. I mean, on this, we're talking, the three of us. I don't think this. You look at the entire House of Representatives. Thomas Massey, I know, has a brain, but otherwise, Mike Johnson is the House Speaker. Hold him with James Madison in the first Congress writing the Bill of Rights. I mean, it's a joke how far we've plunged. And I say the earmark is, and Benjamin Franklin recognized this at the Constitutional Convention. He said, you combine money and power in a single office, you're going to get horrible, horrible people attracted to that position, which is, again, I repeat myself, another reason to downsize government, because government's going to be operated by human beings. And with regard to the gerrymandering, well, part of this too is when you look at the outset with regard to districting, because we've had districting since 1789. When gerrymandering came because there was a congressman, a politician from Massachusetts called Elbridge Gerry, and so somebody drew one of the first districts that looked like a gerrymander because it was a salamander, but they called it a gerrymander. But it was really tiny compared to what we have today. There was an occasional crazy shaped district, but by and large, when you read the first 100 years of Congress, no, generally speaking, Congress represented a fair cross-section of the popular vote. You didn't have these ridiculous gerrymandered districts now. And again, part of it is because the higher the stakes are, the more people are willing to cheat and steal to win, because they got more to get. And so that's what makes it worse and worse every year, because the government gets bigger and bigger no matter the rhetoric, and the power to control our lives gets greater and greater, more frightening now with AI and all these. We're talking about the intelligence and not only the spying, but the ability to control and look at our finances. So we know what's going to happen. And if people don't recognize that, we're going to undo 1776.
Well, this is why I often bring up that point. Like with everything we've discussed, all the corruption, even your point about how the worse and worse people going into politics, the idea the government gets bigger and bigger, they're spending more and more, they're invested in more foreign engagement. Like it's hard not to think, why wouldn't they have collectively gotten to a point to where they, or maybe just incrementally, your vote becomes less and less important. It becomes manipulated by voting machine stuff, which, by the way, nobody should deny. Clint Curtis testified in front of state Congress about that, that he was paid to manipulate these machines. I think it was for Senator Fein, I think, if I remember correctly. But the point is that ultimately, there's so many examples of this. So I think, we're at a point where why wouldn't they have gotten to a point to where they make it to where our vote is only about momentum, only about the theater, the show of it all? You know what I mean? Like, or again, maybe it's not entirely, but just that a vast portion of what's actually happening is able to be corralled, controlled, manipulated, cheated. You know what I mean? And I just feel like with everything else we're discussing, it feels like there's just one half step away from going, that's where we are. I mean, I don't know if you guys agree with that, but it seems logical that that's where they'd be aiming toward at the very least.
Yeah. And the other thing, it's a little bit ironic that the gerrymandering and the effort by members of Congress to get reelected every year, but they give away all the power to the executive anyway. I mean, yeah. They don't really exercise any authority whatsoever. I mean, they have the Russell Vaught, the head of OMB, says congressional appropriations are advisory only, and there's no pushback. I mean, if I was in Congress, I would say I'm impeaching and removing you. What do you mean advisory only? The power of the purse is what Madison said gives the congressional stranglehold over the executive branch. Advisory only? Then we'll tell you that, presidential signatures on bills are advisory only too. We don't need a signature. I mean, what is this? And Congress sits there like turn the other cheek, like Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount. Really? So, they fight over being ornamented, what they do.
Yeah, or at the very least, as you're pointing out, Bruce, just they're giving up their power. They're standing back because they're either benefiting in their other ways, or because they just don't care, because they're acting in somebody else's interest. Whatever it is, it's clear that we are losing that. That the American people are the ones that are being sold out in one way or another. Back to your same point of why we need to stand up more and speak out more and make that change. I'm very skeptical about how we can even make that happen through this, but I'm with you, and I think we should try as best we can.
Yeah, we got to try. But I mean, another example of this is the Epstein files. Congress has the ability. We don't get Rule 6E to get the files out of the grand. Congress can enact a statute. Give us the files. Right. It's our property. It's our money that created them. They don't have to wait on some judge. They can just say, and Trump can't withhold it, just subpoena the darn stuff. And remember when Richard Nixon defied a subpoena, that was an article of impeachment against him. So that then the members of Congress, they say, well, with some Mike Johnson, we want to get these files. Well, then do something. You have the power to get them. He's just a tail wagged on Trump. It's amazing,
What's interesting? One statement that's been floated by a lot of the higher kind of influencers on the Trump side is, once they recognized that that was not going the direction, in a lot of the actual MAGA base was not buying the narrative, it was a hoax, they started floating this idea that, well, what if releasing the Epstein files would bring down the country? Would you still want that? What if it's half of Congress and half of the government, and like almost starting to make the narrative that maybe we should just ignore it because it's going to cause the collapse of the country that you love so much. It just seems very interesting. And I think there may be some level of truth to that, that it's that at this point in time, whatever it is that everyone's either paid off, influenced, or blackmailed to not talk about it, or they're all in some way corrupted by this. It just seems interesting that everyone wants to look the other way. Everybody. That speaks volumes in its own right.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's true. Most everybody in Congress does have skeleton in their closet. I remember working in the Clinton's impeachment. And so anyway, they do the Monica Lewinsky and Jennifer Flowers, whatever. And then we get the House speakers. Well, Gingrich had to leave, and then everybody had their youthful indiscretions. That was the euphemism, right, for sleeping and cheating on your wife. So we had a scheme of 3 or 4 House speakers who had like 1 or 2 days in the office, and then something come up, and we ended up with Denny Hastert, who actually had sex with males rather than the females. So, and that's the kind of people I say we got in Congress. So they're all fearful of skeletons. So none of them want to say anything.
A judge called Hastert a serial child molester when they charged him. I mean, it's what, second in line to the president. It's just crazy to me. I mean, there's reasons like that right there that people then ask the larger question, which I do think is valid about but not the all encompassing kind of point that we get from the partisan. But, there's so many ways that these people, and to your point again, because of the kind of diminishing character of this field, that they're just susceptible to whether it's lobbyists or anything beyond that. It's just so obvious that to your point again, I think they gravitate towards it so they can make those deals, and then it just builds that way. Yeah.
I think you're exactly right, Ryan. And so we end up with, everybody in cahoots with we try to underscore, the so huge divide between Republicans and Democrats, but really they're all in the same club. Right?
I agree.
Well, this argument that Bruce is making, with all his reverence for Madison, some of it I share, some I don't. I think this shows, though, that who were more prescient were the anti-federalists, people like George Mason and Patrick Henry. And why? Because this was the issue of the debate, is if you have a tyrannical president, who will stop them? Okay? They all were convinced that there would be presidents that had tyranny. I don't think anyone who signed that document did not think that there would be some president who would not attempt to be a despot, and they thought that the system of checks and balances would be sufficient to protect us against a despot. The difference was George Mason and Patrick Henry were skeptical that the Congress, with the powers of impeachment, would actually ever use them to limit the president. So they thought the system would be so corrupt that it would be that, which is why they were against the Constitution, because they were, again, all of them were against tyranny. Only there was some group who felt that the Constitution did not do a sufficient job to protect us from tyranny. And the anti-federalists have proven to be right about the fact that this Constitution has not done a sufficient job to protect us from tyranny, because this is what we have today. So there were some flaws in the design, and of course, no design is perfect, and no matter how genius a person is, they're going to come up with some flaws in the design. But this was specifically the flaw. This was the area that the anti-federalists were concerned about, is the centralization of power, and was the Constitution strong enough protecting the people against tyranny from government? And the anti-federalists said no. Okay, the people, the Madisonians, said yes. And here we are today. So it was a very vigorous debate about the impeachment, and there was a divisive debate about who supported impeachment and who didn't, and why they supported impeachment, and how easy it should be to facilitate impeachment. And because of the concern was about a tyrannical government. So we have a tyrannical government today because the tools, because as what Patrick Henry believed is, we have a theoretical ability to impeach somebody, but that Congress was never going to actually do it. And so he wouldn't bet that the liberty of the people on Congress doing the right thing. So
but Jeff, you're overlooking, Jeffrey, 2 important points.
Oh, dang it.
Go ahead. What happened to Bruce?
He cut out. Last time that happened, he was still talking in the background.
Go ahead.
You cut out for a
Madison
second, Bruce.
understood. I said Madison understood that without education, a system wasn't going to work, and that was Ben Franklin, a republic if you can keep it.
Right.
They understood it wasn't going to survive on autopilot, and they couldn't imagine that, given the educational opportunities, that we would squander that education. Remember Madison: knowledge will forever govern ignorance, and a people who mean to be their own governors must arm themselves with the power knowledge gives. So that they knew the danger, but they thought education could keep it under control. Now, then unfortunately, they couldn't believe we would be so moronic to just walk away from the need to be educated.
Well,
It's a constitutionally illiterate society.
That the government created that, though, right? Through very organized, like, even the Prussian-based school system that we have is kind of designed to create obedient workers. So you could argue that whether it's I would agree it's our responsibility to fight to keep what we want. But I think a lot of Americans are kind of blinded by the idea that we are in that place already and accept what the government presents to them, and so we've been played in that way too. But I agree with you, Bruce. I just think it's both. It's a manipulation.
It's both, but so it's a combination. And anyway, there's only so much you can do with structure. If people are bent on destroying themselves and becoming morons, you can't help them from, dropping off of a cliff. You can take a horse to water, you can't make it drink. Yeah. And that's where we are now. I think it's the DNA of our culture is so bad. No system can make it work.
That's why in some respect, I know none of us are fans of Elon Musk. I think the only hope, the only people who were successful, we had two constraints on spending since the post Reagan years, and even Reagan spent too much, but less than others. Was one during the Clinton years, and the Clinton years occurred because of a third party that basically was out there disciplining the other parties, which was the Perot wing that got enough votes with people to say, if I don't appeal to the Perot voter, I don't win. So then we had the sequestration during the Tea Party era, which lasted 2 to 4 years. It was a very short ability that the Tea Party had any real bargaining power. But when they had bargaining power, that was a period of time where growth of government spending was significantly lower. And and I think people don't remember, when did they break sequestration and start spending money again? When the Republicans destroyed the Tea Party and the Republicans got the majority in Congress. That's when they said, we don't need the sequestration anymore. We want to spend money. The Democrats said, you want to spend money? We're happy to spend more money with you. You spend more in the military, we'll spend more in domestic, and we'll each be happy. And they each went out going around spending big money again for the only period of time, was the only party for that short period of time that was able to say, we're willing to shut down government in case if you don't stop spending.
Yeah, and the loudest voices against sequestration was the military-industrial complex. That was it. They said, no way. We need to keep spending by leaps and bounds on everything under the sun, even trillions of dollars for a single aircraft, the F-35. But they led the charge against sequestration. It was the Warhawks more than anybody else. That's what they got.
Yeah, yes, the Republicans wanted to give the Warhawks more money. And the Democrats said, okay, you give the Warhawks money, you got to give us more money for domestic spending. And we said, the Republicans said, okay, we're happy with that. So you'll give to your constituents, and we'll give to our constituents, and everybody will keep being happy doing that. But I think that so these parties will never, if you go through the process now, the Republicans. I think I shared that article where Gateway Public said, oh, the Trump administration, they're slashing spending. Okay. $7 trillion budget. They found $9 billion of cuts in $7 trillion, and that's slashing spending. Okay. So, so it's slash spending. If somebody said, oh, I'm going to give you a discount, this was $100. Now it's only $99.90. Okay. I've slashed the price. Okay, no, that would not be the word. It's like a microscopic discount. So, so absurd. Again, the abuse of languages, which is what they are very good at, is abusing language. So it becomes completely meaningless. And therefore, we have no way of communicating with each other because nobody ever knows what any word means because we abuse every word, as Bruce said. But, it just, maybe the only way that things will get better is if a third party could get a critical base and keep itself independent. And if they could win, if they can win just enough votes in the House, to have, 10 or 15 seats in the House and keep this brace of 10 or 15 seats, that could be large enough for them to could be a block that could stop the passage of a budget, and if they could survive, being accused of shutting down government, and if they could survive that and keep that base, then maybe if we had, going back to almost the thing that Bruce, that Ryan, that you mentioned, the 3.5%, if we could just get a small percentage of people in Congress that are prepared to do the right thing and to respect the Constitution, if they acted as a block, they can make significant impact. Okay, we just need a very small percentage, to accomplish that, and that's all the people need to do. The people need to organize themselves, elect a small block that say we want a constitutional government. Okay, we want to return to our foundational principles. You don't need a majority of the people to do that. You just need a small percentage of the people to do that, and you need that to be a solid block. And if it becomes a solid block, then that block has significant bargaining power and could make significant changes. But until that happens, we're just going to continue down this path. So Bruce, I think, is having another conversation.
Yeah, I thought maybe he was trying to talk, but I think someone's talking. Well, I was just going to add in general that, I am worried too about the direction of the America Party, the Elon Musk point, and maybe just being the long sought kind of third. I've been waiting for that ploy. Not to say that we shouldn't consider the reality of, an organic movement, but or two things, that any organic movement that I've ever seen always seems to be co-opted by the same problems in this country. But either way, that I'm worried that might be a play to just kind of corral us into the new same old thing. You know what I mean? Or really just the AI technocrat driven new party, which is where I see that going. But I think we should be open to it, hope for it, right? But very skeptical of where that goes, because
I don't think Musk's going to be the leader. Maybe if somebody else can lead it, then Musk will write that person a check without interfering too much, and then that could be pretty free of it. But I don't anticipate that'll happen. But I think we'll need something like that. I mean, Perot had a big checkbook and he was willing to use it. The Tea Party was more of an organic movement, and then they had somebody like a Ron Paul, who was a very principled person, who was very influential in that. I don't see Rand being able to create. I think the type of people in Congress who you would hope might be able to have more success doing that, is like a Rand Paul and a Massey, with called the Freedom Caucus, but the Freedom Caucus ought to change their name, because their label is a misrepresentation of the word freedom. So they're fraudulently using that word. So So I'm not suggesting that Musk is the guy. Actually, I agree that Musk is not the person at all. But the question is just, will somebody emerge? Who cares about politics? I don't. I figure out how to take care of myself, and so I don't need money from other people. So I don't need government. And I don't do anything that anybody needs protection against me. So as long as I'm not coveting what's not mine, and can figure out how to live an independent life myself, I don't need to ask anything of anybody else, and there's no reason anyone should ask anything of me. Of course they do, and I have to pay taxes. But if more people just lived according to those principles of saying I can figure out my own life, and I don't need help from anyone else. For me, anyone who needs help from somebody else is a dependent. I don't like the idea of dependents voting. So if somebody can't take care of themselves, they're not an adult. And anyone who's not an adult, I don't care what age you are, you shouldn't vote. You shouldn't be able to vote, claims against other people for your benefit. So, government The government was not designed to be a rent extraction machine.
Mhm.
That's all it's become, is a rent extraction machine. So that's all people want government to do, is to extract rent, is to take things from other people, that they don't like, and give it to themselves and other people they do like. And everything they want is through an act of coercion, and nobody really cares about the concept of consent. It's all about coercion. So I guess we can't count on Bruce coming back. So I'd like to give you the opportunity of concluding this conversation, Ryan. Go
Yeah,
ahead.
well, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I always find these such interesting, insightful conversations. It's like I said last time, it's a breath of fresh air to be able to discuss these things from a kind of nonpartisan, objective perspective. But I have a lot of hope and a lot of like I said, when I lost power, that I have a higher opinion, I think, of most people in this country, and I think that a lot of them want what better for this country, but maybe are been lied to or manipulated into thinking what that may be. Either way, I think that we're in this kind of transitional moment right now as the people, also of the power structure. And I think those are separate things. But I think as we wake up to all this stuff and start questioning these things, I mean, just fall back into what Bruce and Jeffrey are talking about, just like the core value of liberty, of self-determination, and let that guide you right now, your integrity, your principles, and stop allowing kind of the partisan rationale of why those things don't matter in the moment, to guide your choices. We got to stick to what we believe in now more than ever. So thank you, Jeffrey, once again.
Well, thank you for those words, and I hope everybody has a wonderful day. And sorry we don't get to hear Bruce's last words, but thank you so much, Ryan. It's nice to conclude with your words.
Thank you, Jeffrey.
Take care.
See you next
Bye.
time.